He was my first love at 16. Now he's the Mafia boss. And I'm the doctor treating his dying mother. The urgent chime of my secure line, rarely used outside of critical consultations, shattered the fragile peace of my sterile office. It was well past visiting hours, the city lights a mosaic against the glass of my high-rise clinic. Dr. Emma Romano, oncologist, often found her nights long, but this felt different. The voice on the other end, clipped and authoritative, didn't introduce himself. He simply stated, "Dr. Romano, we require a discreet home consultation. Immediate. Patient is Isabella Santoro. Advanced metastatic disease." My fingers tightened around the receiver. Santoro. The name struck a low, discordant chord in my memory, a ghost note from a melody I'd long buried. Isabella Santoro. Could it be? I pushed the thought aside. My patients were terminal, their names often fading into the clinical lexicon of diagnoses and prognoses. My only obligation was to them, to the quiet dignity I afforded them in their final chapter. Location? I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the sudden tremor in my chest. A precise address in the exclusive hills overlooking the city was given, a district synonymous with old money and even older secrets. A car will be dispatched in 10 minutes. It's imperative you come alone. Your usual medical bag will suffice. The line went dead before I could ask another question. No pleasantries, no insurance queries, no preliminary patient history. Just an order. A wave of unease rippled through me, cold and sharp. This wasn't standard procedure. But a dying patient, Isabella Santoro, needed me. My commitment to my oath overruled my growing apprehension. I grabbed my worn leather medical bag, its contents a silent testament to years spent battling the inevitable. Scalpel-sharp competence was my armor. 10 minutes later, a sleek obsidian Mercedes-Benz S-Class, unmarked and silent as a phantom, glided to the curb. The tinted windows made it impossible to discern the driver, but the vehicle's polished gleam spoke of an unseen power. I slid into the plush leather interior, the door closing with a hushed thud that felt less like an invitation and more like an incarceration. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with eyes that missed nothing in the rearview mirror, offered no greeting. He simply nodded once, then accelerated into the night. The drive was short, but felt interminable. Each block that passed was a mile further from my ordinary world, my predictable routines. My mind, usually a fortress of clinical logic, began to drift, unwelcome memories stirring. Santoro. It couldn't be. The Santoros, grocers, not titans of industry with sprawling estates. The grocer's son, Marco, with his dark, intense eyes and a smile that had stolen my breath at 16. My first love, my first kiss, stolen moments behind his father's market. He'd vanished, a silent echo in the summer heat, leaving behind only the ache of absence. No goodbye, just a void. Witness protection. They'd whispered through the grapevine. After his father's violent, abrupt end, I pushed the thoughts down, a practiced suppression. That girl, Emma, had died with Marco's departure. Dr. Romano was a different entity altogether. The car ascended a winding private road, flanked by manicured cypress trees and hidden security cameras that glinted like predatory eyes in the moonlight. We passed through an ornate wrought iron gate that seemed to melt open at our approach. The mansion that emerged was less a home and more a fortified citadel. Stone and glass, sprawling wings, and an aura of formidable wealth. The air here was heavy with it, a scent of old money and newer power. 2 more men, built like stone statues, met us at the grand entrance. They gave me a cursory, almost dismissive nod, then directed me down a long, silently carpeted hallway, rich with the scent of beeswax polish and expensive lilies. Each step felt heavy, the silence amplifying the thrum of my own heartbeat. My medical bag, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a lead weight in my hand. I was led to a lavish bedroom, more suite than sick room. The decor was opulent. Silk wallpaper, antique furniture, a crystal chandelier casting a soft, ethereal glow. But amidst the luxury, the stark reality of illness was undeniable. A hospital bed, discreetly disguised as a regal 4-poster, dominated the center of the room. An IV pole stood sentinel beside it, its clear bags drip-feeding life-sustaining fluids. And there she was, Isabella Santoro, Her face, though ravaged by disease, was still beautiful, framed by silver hair spread against the pillows. Her eyes, once bright and lively, were now sunken, shadowed pools, clouded with pain and the haze of medication. Recognition hit me then, a wave of profound sorrow. It was her, the kind woman who had always slipped me an extra cannoli when I'd visit Marco at the store. Dr. Romano. A soft, reedy voice whispered from the bed. Isabella. Her gaze met mine, a flicker of something in their depths. Was it recognition too, or just the weary welcome of a dying woman? I moved to her side, my professional mask firmly in place. Mrs. Santoro, I murmured, my voice automatically softening. I'm Dr. Romano. I understand you're experiencing some discomfort. I began my routine, checking her vitals, feeling her pulse, my fingers gentle and practiced. The professional distance was a shield against the rush of memory and emotion. Her skin felt cool, papery thin. I noted the faint telltale signs of advanced cachexia, the wasting that accompanies end-stage cancer. As I listened to her heart, a shadow fell across the room. A tangible shift in the air, a crackle of suppressed energy. My breath hitched. I didn't need to look up. My body already knew. 12 years. And my body still remembered the way he commanded space. He walked in. Marco Santoro, the boy I'd loved, now a man forged in fire. He was taller, broader, his shoulders filling the doorway with a formidable presence. The boyish softness had been stripped away, replaced by sharp angles and a dangerous intensity. His dark hair, once falling boyishly across his forehead, was now impeccably styled, gleaming like obsidian. His eyes, the same piercing hazel, held a cold, unwavering gaze that swept over me, leaving a trail of ice in its wake. A fine tailored suit hugged his powerful frame, an armor of wealth and menace. His jaw was set, a faint scar tracing his left cheekbone, a testament to battles fought and won. He looked like the devil, and I suddenly understood why this estate felt like a fortress. He wasn't the grocer's son anymore. He was the boss. Our eyes locked. 12 years collapsed into a single agonizing moment. The air vibrated with unspoken words, with the weight of our shared past and our impossible present. His expression remained utterly impassive, a mask of stone. Mine, I hoped, was equally unreadable. But inside, my carefully constructed walls were crumbling. The 16-year-old girl, long buried, screamed. "Dr. Romano," he said, his voice a low rumble, richer and deeper than I remembered, devoid of warmth. It was a statement, not a question. "My mother requires the best care. You will provide it." He didn't acknowledge our history, not with a glance, not with a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He treated me like a hired commodity, a specialist in a white coat. The insult was a physical blow, yet I registered it only as a dull throb. This wasn't the boy who'd kissed me under the summer stars. This was a man who commanded, who took. "Mr. Santoro," I replied, my voice a fraction too tight, but steady. I met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I am here to ensure your mother's comfort and dignity. My priority is her well-being." The implied challenge in my tone was subtle, but it was there. I wouldn't be intimidated. Not by him, not by his power, not by our past. He moved closer to the bed, his presence dominating the room, radiating an almost palpable energy. He took his mother's frail hand, his touch surprisingly gentle against her translucent skin. His eyes softened, just imperceptibly, when they rested on her. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the boy I'd known, a flicker of humanity in the hardened man. Then his gaze snapped back to me, the ice returning. "Whatever she needs, Dr. Romano. Access to anything, anyone, you will have it." It sounded like an assurance, but it felt like a trap, the closing of an invisible cage. He was offering me everything to treat his mother, but in doing so, he was tying me irrevocably to his world. I couldn't abandon Isabella. Not now, not ever. My professional ethics bound me, but so did something deeper, a lingering affection for the woman who had once been so kind. Over the next few days, I established a routine within the mansion's opulent confines. I spent hours at Isabella's bedside, meticulous in my observations, dedicated to easing her suffering. I reviewed her medical charts, thick with notes from various specialists, reports confirming the aggressive nature of her pancreatic cancer, Her current symptoms, however, began to niggle at the edges of my medical certainty. The extreme fatigue, yes, that was expected. The nausea, the profound weakness. But there was also a peculiar tremors in her hands that didn't align perfectly with the standard progression, and a metallic taste she occasionally mentioned. An odd, persistent sensation that felt off. My training, honed over years of complex cases, screamed at me. Something was amiss. Terminal cancer was a devastating diagnosis, but it followed a predictable, if brutal, trajectory. Isabella's trajectory felt subtly, unnervingly altered. The hair on my arms prickled with an instinct that had saved lives before. I ordered more comprehensive blood tests, specifically requesting an expanded toxicology panel, citing a need to rule out medication interactions to the Santoro staff, a plausible medical explanation. I made sure my requests went through the proper channels, maintaining my professional demeanor, even as my gut churned with growing unease. The results came back 2 days later. I reviewed them in the small, temporary office I'd been assigned, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My eyes scanned the detailed printout, bypassing the expected metabolic markers, zeroing in on the unexpected, arsenic, traces, just enough to be insidious, to contribute to the symptoms, but not so much as to immediately suggest acute poisoning. Someone was poisoning Isabella, while she had terminal cancer, accelerating her death, mimicking the very symptoms of her disease. The horror of it chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just a medical case. It was a crime, and it was happening under Marco Santoro's formidable roof. My breath hitched. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. This was beyond anything I'd encountered. A cold, calculated malice preying on a dying woman. I felt a surge of professional outrage, mixed with a chilling fear. If I knew this, I was now inextricably involved. This wasn't merely a diagnosis. It was a deadly secret. And I was now holding it. I gathered the lab results, my hands trembling slightly, then moved to Isabella's room, my gaze falling on the IV pole. My eyes narrowed. I'd noticed it before, a faint, almost imperceptible film inside one of the bags. I'd dismissed it as a manufacturing anomaly, or perhaps a harmless precipitate from a nutrient solution. Now I knew better. My trained eye detected a subtle discoloration in the solution itself, a faint opalescence that wasn't quite right. My fingers, steady despite the internal tremor, unhooked the bag, carefully sealing it in a sterile sample container from my medical bag. I would send it for independent analysis. My next step was clear, though terrifying. I had to confront Marco. He had given me access to anything, anyone. He needed to know. This was his mother. I found him in a cavernous study, all dark wood and leather, flanked by 2 men who radiated silent menace. He was on the phone, his voice a low, authoritative murmur, his gaze sweeping over complex documents spread across a vast mahogany desk. He looked up as I entered, his eyes registering my presence with that familiar, unnerving impassivity. He ended his call abruptly, setting the phone down with a decisive click. "Dr. Romano," he acknowledged, his voice neutral. "Is there a change in my mother's condition?" I walked to the desk, placing the toxicology report and the sealed IV bag on its polished surface, directly in his line of sight. My voice was calm, but the force of my conviction was like a steel rod. "Mr. Santoro, I've made a discovery. Your mother's symptoms, while consistent with her cancer, also have an additional, deeply concerning etiology." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking from my face to the documents on his desk, then to the report. His expression remained unreadable, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. A silent, powerful warning. "Etiology?" he repeated, his tone laced with a skepticism that stung. "She is dying of cancer, doctor. A fact I presume you are aware of." "I am acutely aware," I countered, my jaw tight. "But she is also being poisoned." His gaze sharpened, boring into mine. One of the men shifted subtly behind him. The air in the room grew suddenly thick, heavy with unspoken threats. Marco's face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes like chipped ice. "Poisoned?" he bit out, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it vibrated with lethal intent. "You came here, into my home, accepted my trust, and now you accuse my family of this?" His eyes burned with accusation, fueled by the raw, unspoken wounds of our past. "You left me once, Emma. Now you come back only to slander my name, to accuse my family of harming my dying mother?" The accusation was clear, a desperate attempt for attention, or perhaps something worse. The memory of our painful separation was a weapon he wielded against me, twisting my professional integrity into something malicious. "My personal history with you is irrelevant, Mr. Santoro," I stated, my voice holding firm though my heart pounded. "My only concern is your mother. And the evidence. Look at the toxicology report." I pushed the document across the desk. Arsenic, traces consistent with chronic low-dose exposure, enough to exacerbate her symptoms, enough to accelerate her decline, but not enough to be immediately fatal on its own, designed to be masked by the cancer. He picked up the report, his powerful fingers surprisingly delicate as they handled the paper. His eyes scanned the findings, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. The impassivity began to crack, replaced by a dawning, terrible realization. But skepticism still clung to him like a shroud. This could be a mistake, a lab error, or a medication interaction you failed to identify. "It's not a mistake," I insisted, my voice rising slightly, unwilling to yield. "I've cross-referenced her current medications, her diet. Nothing in her regimen accounts for this. And then there's this." I pushed the sealed IV bag towards him. "I've already noticed a subtle discoloration in one of her IV bags. I believe it's been tampered with. I've sent a separate sample to an independent lab for verification. But my initial assessment and the preliminary toxicology are clear." His gaze dropped to the IV bag, then back to the report, then to my face. The fury was still there, a simmering inferno beneath his control, but now it was tinged with something else. A horrifying doubt, a dawning fear. He saw the cold, hard science. He saw my unwavering conviction. He saw the truth, or at least the terrifying possibility of it. His eyes, fixed on mine, were no longer accusing, but searching. "You're saying someone in this house, someone with access to my mother's medications, is actively trying to kill her?" His voice was low, guttural, a predatory growl. The air in the room thickened with unspoken violence. "I am saying the medical evidence points unequivocally to deliberate poisoning, Mr. Santoro," I replied, my gaze meeting his, unyielding. "Someone is poisoning your mother." He stared at the IV bag, his fingers flexing, as if he wanted to crush it. The initial disbelief had shattered, replaced by a cold, deadly rage. His mother, the last link to his past, being slowly murdered under his own roof, by someone within his fortress. He slammed his fist, not on the desk, but on the armrest of his chair, a sound like a gunshot in the silent room. "Guards," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the study. 2 more men appeared instantly, their faces grim. "Secure all of my mother's medications. Every bottle, every bag, every syringe, and find me the nurse on duty for the last 48 hours. Now." He turned back to me, his eyes blazing, a dangerous, possessive gleam now mingling with the fury. "You," he said, his voice a low command, "you will stay here. You will continue to treat my mother, and you will not leave this estate until we have answers, until this threat is neutralized. You uncovered this, Dr. Romano. Now you will help me see it through." It wasn't a request. It was an order, a definitive claim. His words were a steel trap closing around me. I had just walked into the lion's den, not as a visitor, but as a necessary, inconvenient pawn. I had exposed a deadly secret within his walls, and now I was inextricably bound to his dangerous world. My past with Marco, the boy, was now an inescapable reality with Marco, the Mafia boss. My life, my safety, my future were no longer my own. I was trapped. The guards appeared almost instantly, a phalanx of silent muscle. Marco's command had rippled through the mansion like a shockwave, leaving the air heavy with an unspoken threat. His eyes, still locked on mine, were no longer accusatory but something far more dangerous. A possessive intensity that felt like a physical weight, a claim. He wasn't asking for my help. He was taking it. My world, once defined by sterile clinics and predictable diagnoses, had just imploded. I was no longer Dr. Emma Romano, autonomous and self-sufficient. I was a doctor, yes, but also a captive, held within the gilded cage of the Santoro estate. "My private quarters are being prepared for you," he stated, his voice a low growl that brooked no argument. "A secure line will be installed. You will have access to my mother's full medical history, and any equipment you deem necessary. But you will not leave this property." The finality of his tone was absolute. He didn't care for my protests, my autonomy. His mother's life and now my knowledge were his priority, and I was the key to both. My jaw tightened. "Mr. Santoro," I began, attempting to inject a measure of professional defiance into my voice. "I have patients at my clinic, a life in the city. You cannot simply hold me here against my will." His lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. It was a terrifying sight, a flash of pure, unadulterated power. "I assure you, doctor, you will find your current arrangement far more amenable than the alternatives. Consider it protective custody. You have uncovered a truth that threatens my family, a truth someone went to great lengths to conceal. That makes you inadvertently a target." "I lost you once," he added, the words cutting through the air like a blade, a sudden, unexpected crack in his hardened veneer. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, held a ghost of the boy who'd vanished, a flicker of raw regret. "I won't lose you again." The sentiment, though laced with a dangerous possessiveness, sent an unwelcome shiver down my spine, a confusing mix of fear and something achingly familiar. The implication was clear. My safety was directly tied to my captivity. And in that moment I knew he was right. My discovery had thrust me into a world of shadows and deadly secrets, a world I was utterly unprepared for. To walk out now would be to expose myself to the unknown enemy lurking within this very house. And I wouldn't abandon Isabella, not while I knew her life was being stolen, not when I could fight for her. I swallowed, the taste of metallic fear and grudging acceptance coating my tongue. "Understood," I said, the single word an admission of surrender, a concession to a power far greater than my own. "However, I require access to a secure external laboratory for all future analyses, and I will need a dedicated workspace away from prying eyes." My conditions, small as they were a means of retaining some semblance of control, a fragile boundary in this gilded cage. He simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Consider it done. Anything to find this bastard." The venom in his voice was chilling, a stark reminder of the brutality that lay just beneath his controlled exterior. A discreet knock sounded at the study door. One of the hulking guards, the one who'd driven me, entered. "Marco, we have the night nurse." "Maria Rossi." Marco's eyes narrowed, a cold fire burning within their depths. "Bring her to the interrogation room, alone, and ensure she cannot speak to anyone." The command was delivered with chilling efficiency, without a hint of emotion. This was the Mafia boss, the man who wielded power with ruthless precision. The coldness radiating from him was palpable, a stark contrast to the subtle possessiveness he'd shown me moments before. I watched, horrified, as he rose, his formidable presence filling the doorway. He paused, turning to me, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly, a fleeting warmth that felt utterly incongruous with the scene he was about to orchestrate. "Dr. Romano, you will find your new suite on the 3rd floor, East Wing. It's spacious, with a private study. One of my men, Dante, will escort you. He'll be stationed outside your door, for your protection." The last 2 words were delivered with a gravity that left no room for doubt. As he swept out of the study, the heavy door closing behind him with a resonant thud, I felt a tremor run through me. The man was a walking paradox, ruthless and tender, dangerous and protective. A complicated, terrifying man, now my captor, my protector, my first love. Dante, a silent, imposing figure with an unnervingly calm demeanor, led me through a labyrinth of hallways, up a grand staircase, and into a wing that felt worlds away from the main hub of the mansion. My new suite was, as Marco had promised, spacious and exquisitely furnished. A vast bedroom with a 4-poster bed draped in rich fabrics, an adjoining living area, and a separate light-filled study equipped with a pristine desk and a secured computer. A private bathroom, more luxurious than any spa, completed the ensemble. It was a gilded cage indeed, adorned with every comfort, yet the bars were invisible, woven into the fabric of the high security, the constant surveillance, and the unwavering presence of Dante just outside my door. I unpacked my medical bag, setting up a makeshift diagnostic area in the study. My thoughts raced, a whirlwind of fear, anger, and a bewildering sense of déjà vu. The Marco Santoro I'd known was a grocer's son, full of youthful fire and burgeoning ambition. But never this lethal intensity, the raw power he exuded, the casual way he ordered someone to an interrogation room, was unsettling. Yet, the glimpse of vulnerability, the "I won't lose you again," resonated deep within me, stirring dormant emotions I thought long dead. My mind, however, was a professional instrument, trained to focus on facts, on diagnoses. Isabella, my patient, my mission. I pulled up her extensive medical records on the secure computer Marco had provided. Pages and pages of scans, blood work, physician's notes. I spent hours poring over them, trying to find any anomaly, any pre-existing condition that might mimic arsenic poisoning, but found nothing. The cancer was aggressive, advanced, but the additional symptoms were textbook for chronic heavy metal exposure. It was a deliberate, insidious act. Later that night, unable to sleep, I ventured out of my suite, pushing the boundaries of my confinement. Dante, a shadow, moved silently from his post as I opened the door. "Dr. Romano," he said, his voice deep, respectful but firm. "Can I assist you?" "I need some fresh air," I stated, my gaze challenging his. "A walk in the gardens, perhaps?" His eyes, dark and unreadable, assessed me. "The gardens are expansive, doctor, and unlit in places. Perhaps a different time would be better. For now, the library is available, or the main living area." It was a polite refusal, a firm reminder of my restricted status. "The library, then," I conceded, my frustration simmering. It was another meticulously decorated room, filled with towering bookshelves, rich with the scent of aged paper and leather. I found myself drawn to an antique globe, spinning it idly, tracing the contours of continents, a silent longing for the vast open world beyond these walls. The library, for all its beauty, felt like another gilded prison cell. As the days of my involuntary residence stretched into a week, I settled into a new, uncomfortable rhythm. My days revolved around Isabella, meticulously monitoring her condition, adjusting her medication, and cautiously, subtly, trying to counteract the effects of the poison. I sent the tampered IV bag and further blood samples to the independent lab, using the secure courier system Marco had established. The confirmation came back swiftly. The IV bag contained trace elements of arsenic, just as I'd suspected. It was definitive proof. Marco had been right to trust me. This validation oddly forged a new, fragile bond of understanding between us. It wasn't about our past. It was about the present, about Isabella. He saw my competence, my unwavering dedication. I saw his raw, protective love for his mother. Our interactions became less hostile, though the undercurrent of unspoken history and simmering attraction remained, a dangerous tension that hummed between us. He would appear in Isabella's room, a silent sentinel, watching me work, his gaze intense, assessing. Sometimes our eyes would meet, and in those moments, the 12 years would melt away, leaving only the complicated echoes of first love and devastating loss. One evening, Marco found me in Isabella's room, meticulously adjusting her pain medication. The light from the bedside lamp cast long shadows, softening the edges of the room. Isabella was asleep, her breathing shallow but peaceful. I straightened, turning to face him. "The lab confirmed it," he said, his voice low, devoid of its usual clipped authority. "The IV bag. It contained the same trace elements of arsenic." His jaw was tight, his eyes burning with a controlled fury. Someone wanted to ensure she didn't last much longer, and they hoped her cancer would mask their treachery. I nodded, my heart heavy. "It's insidious, Mr. Santoro. Someone is playing God with her life, accelerating her suffering." He approached me, slowly, deliberately. His proximity was intoxicating, a potent cocktail of fear and longing. He stopped just inches from me, his presence a wall of heat and power. His hand, large and calloused, reached out, not to threaten, but to touch. His fingers brushed against my hair, gently tucking a stray strand behind my ear. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture sent a jolt through me, a familiar current that had once ignited my 16-year-old self. My breath caught in my throat. "Emma," he murmured. My name a low caress on his lips, a stark contrast to the formal Dr. Romano he usually employed. His thumb grazed my cheekbone, sending shivers through my skin. "Thank you, for seeing what I could not, for not giving up on her." His gaze was intense, vulnerable, a window into the raw grief and gratitude he rarely showed. I owe you more than I can say." My skin burned where he touched me, a ghost of memory awakening dormant sensations. This was the Marco who had held my hand, who had kissed me with such tender reverence. But he was also the man who ruled a dangerous empire, the man who had just ordered an interrogation. The duality was addictive, terrifying. I wanted to lean into his touch, to seek comfort in his unexpected tenderness. But the ever-present danger held me back. I'm just doing my job. Marco, I managed, my voice a whisper, betraying the tremble within. I pulled back, subtly, gently, breaking the contact, but the ghost of his touch lingered. His eyes held a flicker of understanding, a hint of disappointment, before his mask slid back into place. Your job, he repeated, the coolness returning. Yes, continue doing it. And remember, you are safe here, as long as you stay here. It was a possessive tenderness, followed by a stark reminder of my captivity. My safety was inextricably linked to my obedience. The next few days were a blur of intense focus. I reviewed Isabella's daily log, the medication schedules, the names of all household staff with access to her room. Marco, his initial skepticism replaced by a cold, unwavering determination, ordered a full internal investigation. Security footage from the past 6 months was retrieved, every bottle of medication meticulously logged and catalogued. The house, already secure, became a fortress within a fortress, every staff member under scrutiny. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, a silent paranoia that seeped into every corner of the opulent estate. I found myself working alongside him late into the nights, poring over documents, comparing timelines, cross-referencing names and schedules. He was brilliant, ruthless in his analytical approach, missing no detail. We sat across from each other at a large conference table in his study, surrounded by stacks of files, the glow of screens illuminating our faces. The air between us crackled with a strange, undeniable chemistry, the shared intensity of a desperate mission, intertwined with the ghosts of our past. I found myself admiring his sharp mind, his unwavering resolve, even as I feared the power he wielded. One night, while he was on a call in the adjacent room, I took a moment to stretch, my eyes drifting across the meticulously organized shelves in his study. My gaze fell upon a locked antique wooden box, tucked away behind a row of leather-bound books. It seemed out of place in the sleek, modern study, an anachronism. A small, almost imperceptible curiosity tugged at me. It wasn't his usual style. My fingers almost involuntarily reached for it. It was heavier than it looked, intricately carved. I ran my fingers over the cold metal clasp, a faint hum of suspicion growing within me. Why was this here? And why was it so carefully concealed? My medical training, my instinct for uncovering hidden truths, urged me to investigate. I glanced over my shoulder. Marco was still on the phone, his voice a low, intense murmur from the other room, his back to me. A sudden daring impulse seized me. I knew it was foolish, dangerous, a direct challenge to the boundaries he had established. But the doctor in me, the one compelled to uncover secrets, pushed me forward. With a swift, silent movement, I reached into my medical bag, pulling out a small, specialized penlight. It wasn't a lock-picking tool, but a fine, narrow beam. I shone it into the keyhole, examining the intricate mechanism. My father, a hobbyist locksmith in his youth, had taught me a few tricks about simple tumblers, more for fun than anything else. He used to say, "The lock tells a story, Emma. You just have to learn to read it." I found a small, almost invisible notch, a trick of the light, a slight misalignment. I used the fine tip of a dental pick from my medical kit, ostensibly for fine specimen handling, but equally useful for delicate manipulations, and with a deep breath, I inserted it. A minute stretched into an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, the adrenaline surged through me, a potent cocktail of fear and illicit thrill. Then, with a faint click, the latch gave way. I held my breath, slowly lifting the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not what I expected. Not old love letters, not sentimental trinkets. Instead, there was a stack of carefully folded, aged papers, and beneath them, a small, worn, leather-bound ledger. My fingers trembled as I picked up the ledger. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but legible. It wasn't Isabella's medical history. It wasn't related to the poisoning investigation. It was something far older, far more dangerous. The first page I opened detailed shipments, Not groceries, but weapons, illicit cargo, payments, names, dates. And then, a series of cryptic entries, referring to the organization and the incident, followed by dates that coincided precisely with Marco's father's murder and his subsequent disappearance. The entries were dated from 12 years ago, the very summer Marco had vanished. A cold dread washed over me, deeper and more terrifying than anything I'd felt before. This wasn't just about his mother. This was about the very foundations of his empire, his identity, and woven into it, irrevocably, was my own past, my lost love. My eyes scanned a page filled with names. Names I didn't recognize. And then one name, scrawled in a tight, precise hand, leaped out at me, making my blood run cold. Thomas Santoro. Followed by a specific date, just weeks before Isabella's cancer diagnosis, detailing a large undisclosed transfer of funds. Uncle Thomas, the one Isabella occasionally mentioned, always with a sigh, as the family patriarch in Marco's absence, a distant, controlling figure. The ledger dropped from my trembling fingers, clattering softly against the velvet. My eyes darted to the study door. Marco's voice was still a low murmur. He hadn't heard, not yet, but I had. I had just stumbled upon a secret far greater, far more dangerous, than Isabella's poisoning. A secret that hinted at a betrayal, an embezzlement, and a connection to his father's death. A secret that implicated not just Isabella's attacker, but potentially the very fabric of the Santoro organization, and Marco himself. I had peeled back a layer, and beneath it, I found a serpent's nest. My gilded cage had just shrunk, and I was holding evidence that could destroy everything. The leather-bound ledger lay open on the velvet lining of the antique box, its faded ink screaming secrets that echoed across 12 years. Tomas Santoro. The name was a venomous whisper in the silent study, a stark contrast to the clatter of the pages when the book had fallen from my trembling hands just moments before. My breath hitched, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Uncle Thomas, Isabella's brother-in-law, Marco's uncle, a member of the family. The very idea was monstrous. I stared at the entry. A date weeks before Isabella's cancer diagnosis. A substantial, undocumented transfer of funds. What did it mean? Embezzlement? Or something darker? More directly linked to the arsenic I was now fighting within Isabella's veins. The thought that a family member could be capable of such calculated cruelty, poisoning a dying woman for financial gain, sent a shiver of profound revulsion through me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a perversion of familial trust. My mind raced, the doctor's logical circuits suddenly overwhelmed by a flood of paranoia. If Tomas was involved in embezzlement, if this ledger contained evidence of deeper, illicit dealings, then my discovery of Isabella's poisoning wasn't just a medical breakthrough. It was a direct threat to a conspiracy. And if Tomas was willing to poison Isabella, what would he do to me, the outsider who had stumbled upon his treachery? Marco's voice, still a low murmur from the adjacent room, was a sudden, unwelcome sound, pulling me back to the precarious present. He could walk in at any moment. The ledger, the antique box, my illicit discovery, all of it had to be reset, precisely as I had found it. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. With shaking fingers, I carefully picked up the ledger, flipping it back to a random, innocuous page before placing it back in the box. I slid the papers on top, arranging them exactly as they had been. The fine dental pick, still clutched in my hand, was returned to my medical bag. I closed the box, the delicate click of the latch echoing loudly in my ears, though I knew it was barely audible. Then, I gently pushed the box back into its hidden alcove behind the books, wiping away any potential fingerprints with the sleeve of my cardigan. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, almost painful rhythm. My skin felt clammy. I returned to my position at the conference table, picking up Isabella's medical chart, pretending to pore over it, my gaze blurring over the familiar words. My hands, however, were still trembling. The adrenaline that surged through me was a potent, disorienting force. I had just violated Marco's trust, not only by opening a locked item in his private study, but by uncovering a secret he clearly meant to keep hidden. And I had discovered a new suspect, a family member, with a motive beyond mere inheritance. When Marco finally emerged from his call, His expression was still grim, but he seemed to have contained the raw fury from before. He paused, his sharp gaze sweeping over the room, then lingered on me. "Everything all right, doctor?" His voice was calm, but I detected a subtle undercurrent of something. Suspicion. Or simply the heightened awareness of a man under immense pressure. "Yes, Mr. Santoro," I replied, my voice, to my own surprise, sounding steady. I met his gaze, attempting to project an air of composed professionalism. "Just reviewing the latest reports. I believe we should re-examine the household staff rotation, specifically those on duty during the periods of documented poison exposure." It was a deflection, a refocusing on the immediate threat to Isabella, a way to channel my own frantic energy into something productive, something plausible. He nodded, accepting my explanation, though his eyes still held a lingering intensity that made me wonder if he sensed my disquiet. "Already done. I've initiated a deeper background check on everyone who has stepped foot in this house in the past 6 months, including their financial dealings." A cold, ruthless efficiency. That was Marco Santoro. Over the next few days, my internal world was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. My professional dedication to Isabella warred with a terrifying paranoia, a constant awareness of the ledger's contents. I continued my rounds, monitoring Isabella, adjusting her care. I spoke with the other staff members, the cooks, the housekeepers, the remaining nurses, maintaining a professional distance, but subtly observing, looking for any telltale sign, any flicker of guilt or unease. Each pleasant smile, each deferential nod, now felt like a potential mask. Marco and I continued our late-night sessions, poring over evidence, security footage, and medicine logs. The intimacy of our shared mission, the unspoken understanding that grew between us, became a strange balm against the fear. He trusted my medical judgment implicitly now, relying on my observations, my interpretations. And I, despite my fear, found myself drawn to his relentless intellect, his fierce protectiveness. The dangerous man was still, underneath, the boy I had loved, capable of profound loyalty and an almost visceral tenderness. That duality, that addictive pull, was becoming impossible to ignore. One night, around 2 a.m., we were in the opulent, dimly lit kitchen, reviewing a blurred security feed of a side entrance. The mansion was silent, save for the hum of the high-tech equipment and the soft clinking of my mug against the granite counter. Marco leaned over the screen, his dark hair falling forward, obscuring his profile. His arm, corded with muscle, brushed mine as he pointed to a timestamp. The heat from his body, the faint scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely him warm and musky, invaded my senses, stirring a treacherous longing. "See that?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble close to my ear. The gap in coverage. 5 minutes. Just enough time for someone to enter, or leave, undetected, if they knew the blind spots. My heart pounded, not just from the proximity, but from the sudden, chilling realization. Someone did know the blind spots. Someone with intimate knowledge of the mansion's security. Someone like Thomas. As he leaned back, his hand, strong and calloused, covered mine on the table. It was a fleeting touch, a gesture of shared intensity, but it sent a jolt through me, a primal connection that transcended the sterile facts of the investigation. His thumb, rough yet gentle, stroked the back of my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the tension, the unspoken burdens we carried. His gaze met mine, dark and intense. "I never wanted to leave you, Emma," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper, barely audible above the hum of the computer. The confession, so sudden, so unexpected, shattered the carefully constructed professional facade between us. Witness protection said you'd die if I stayed. They painted a picture of what my enemies would do. I was 19. Terrified. I made a choice between your life and my heart. "I'm sorry. For everything." The words were like a physical blow, stripping away 12 years of resentment, of imagined abandonment. The raw honesty in his eyes, the flicker of regret, tore at my defenses. My breath hitched. The apology, so long overdue, so desperately craved, was almost unbearable. It wasn't the cold, calculating Marco speaking, but the boy, broken by an impossible choice. Tears pricked at my eyes. I wanted to tell him it was all right, to pull him close, to fall into the abyss of shared grief and longing. But the ledger, the poison, the danger, were still very real. I pulled my hand away, gently, carefully, the warmth of his touch lingering like a brand. "Marco," I began, my voice thick with emotion. But I cut myself off. I couldn't, not yet. Not while I held a secret that could tear his world apart. "We need to focus on your mother. On finding whoever is doing this." My words were a shield, a retreat to the safety of my professional role. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching, a flicker of hurt passing through their depths, before he nodded, a tight, grim line to his lips. He understood, or at least he accepted my unspoken boundaries. He retreated, physically and emotionally, back to the safe distance of the Mafia boss. The very next morning, a new development. The nurse who had been providing round-the-clock care for Isabella for the past 6 months, a quiet woman named Eleanor, vanished. Her room was empty, her belongings gone. No note, no explanation, just a void. "She fled," Marco stated, his voice devoid of emotion, though his jaw was clenched. She knew, or she was involved. His men had already scoured the estate, confirmed her absence. "This confirms it, Emma, someone inside. Someone she was afraid of, or working with." He turned to me, his eyes blazing with a fierce protective intensity. "This changes things. The danger is escalating. You are now more than ever a target." He paused, his gaze sweeping over my face, as if memorizing every detail. "I lost you once. I won't lose you again." His words were a dark promise, a declaration of ownership. He assigned bodyguards to me, not just Dante outside my suite, but a rotating team, discreet but omnipresent, shadowing my every move within the mansion. My gilded cage had just shrunk again. That evening, a sense of restless agitation spurred me to action. I needed more information. The ledger had provided a crucial clue, a suspicion of Thomas Santoro, but it wasn't enough to act on, not without risking my own life. I needed to know more about Marco's operations, about his enemies, about the true extent of the danger I was in. I remembered the security cameras, the blind spots Marco had pointed out on the footage. If there were blind spots in the external perimeter, there might be internal ones as well. And if I knew the layout, I could find a way to observe, to listen, to gather more information. After Isabella was settled for the night, and after my assigned bodyguard, a hulking man named Enzo, had taken up his post outside my suite, I implemented my plan. I had noticed during my tours of the mansion a rarely used service staircase, tucked away behind the main kitchen, leading down to the basement and up to the attic. It was usually left unlocked, overlooked in favor of the more opulent main stairs and elevators. It was a potential blind spot, a path less traveled. I waited until the mansion was fully asleep, the only sounds the distant hum of the ventilation system. Dressed in dark clothing, with my medical penlight and a small audio recorder from my bag, I slipped out of my room. Enzo, a dark shape against the wall, was momentarily distracted by a muffled sound from down the hall, a deliberate, subtle action I'd orchestrated moments before by activating a loose panel in the wall. It gave me a narrow window. I moved silently, my feet barely disturbing the plush carpet, and made my way to the service staircase. The air in the stairwell was cooler, carrying the scent of dust and damp stone. I descended step by careful step, my penlight casting a thin beam. The basement was a labyrinth of storage rooms, wine cellars, and utility areas. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding, straining to hear any sounds. I found what looked like a rarely used security room, tucked away behind a boiler, its door ajar. A faint glow emanated from within. I crept closer, my blood running cold. Voices. Low, guttural, angry. I peered through the narrow crack in the doorframe, my breath held captive in my chest. Inside, 2 men I didn't recognize stood hunched over a bank of monitors, displaying various feeds from around the estate. Their faces were grim, their expressions etched with a desperate urgency. "Marco's on edge," one of them growled, his voice rough. The doctor's poking around, asking questions. "He thinks someone inside is involved." "Of course he does," the other sneered, his tone laced with malice. "But he doesn't know the full extent. Thomas is panicking, and Valentina is losing her nerve." My blood ran cold. "Thomas bueno Valentina. Marco's uncle and cousin. The names from the ledger. They were discussing Tomas, clearly involved. And Valentina? The sophisticated cousin who visited Isabella regularly, always with a bouquet of flowers and a sympathetic smile. The potential inheritance motive. The doc found the arsenic, the first man continued, his voice tight. Marco believes her. He's looking for the source. If he connects Tomas to the finances before Isabella dies, it's over. He'll tear the family apart. Then Isabella needs to be gone. Sooner, rather than later, the second man hissed, his voice chillingly devoid of humanity. And the doctor. She's too clever, too dangerous. We need to frame her quickly. Thomas has a plan. He says he can make it look like she was behind it all. He needs a few more days to gather everything. He thinks he can plant the evidence in her medical bag. My heart stopped. Frame me? Plant evidence? My medical bag, the very instrument of my healing, now to be twisted into a weapon of accusation. The plan was terrifying in its cold calculation. They knew I was a threat. They knew I was smart, and they were already plotting my downfall. I recoiled from the door, my mind reeling. The air in the stairwell felt suddenly suffocating. I had been right to investigate, right to suspect, but the true extent of their treachery, the cold, calculating plot to frame me, was beyond anything I had imagined. Thomas and Valentina, conspirators, plotting to kill Isabella and scapegoat me. As I backed away, a sudden metallic clang echoed from deeper within the basement. Someone was down here, someone else. A shadow detached itself from the gloom, moving quickly towards my position. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Too close. My heart leaped into my throat. I couldn't be caught here. Not now. Not after what I'd just overheard. The knowledge I possessed was a death sentence. I scrambled back up the service staircase, my carefully chosen blind spot now a dangerous escape route. The footsteps below grew louder, closer. I reached the main floor, adrenaline pumping through my veins, and melted back into the shadows of the mansion's vast corridors. I flew silently back to my suite, my hands shaking so violently I almost couldn't unlock the door. I slipped inside, closing it softly, and leaned against the cold wood, gasping for breath, my chest heaving. Enzo was back at his post, a silent sentinel. He hadn't noticed my brief absence, or if he had, he gave no indication. I closed my eyes, the overheard voices replaying in my mind. Frame her, plant evidence in her medical bag. The danger was no longer abstract, no longer a distant threat Marco was protecting me from. It was personal. It was imminent, and it was closing in. They weren't just trying to kill Isabella. They were coming for me. My gilded cage had just become a death trap. The words from the basement security room echoed in my mind, a terrifying mantra. Frame her. Plant evidence in her medical bag. My blood ran cold, the fear of visceral, sickening knot in my stomach. Thomas and Valentina, conspiring to murder Isabella, and then to pin the blame squarely on me, the clever doctor who had dared to uncover their treachery. The audacity, the sheer cold-blooded cruelty of it, was breathtaking. I leaned against the closed door of my suite, the plush carpet beneath my feet doing little to ground me. Enzo, my silent sentinel, was still outside, oblivious to the terror that now gripped me. I was trapped, not just by Marco's possessive protection, but by a deadly plot to destroy me. Every shadow in the opulent room seemed to shift, to hold a hidden threat. My medical bag, once a symbol of healing, now felt like a ticking time bomb, a vessel for my undoing. I needed to act. But how? My unique knowledge, the information from the ledger, the overheard conversation, it was all circumstantial. They had a plan to frame me, to make it look airtight. I had to prove their guilt. And fast. The next morning, I moved with a heightened sense of urgency, a carefully constructed facade of professional composure masking the frantic churn of my mind. My visits to Isabella were more detailed, my observations sharper. I was not just her doctor. I was her last line of defense and my own. I watched Thomas when he visited, a man with a perpetually solicitous expression that now seemed utterly grotesque. He was older, portly, with a thin smile that never quite reached his eyes. And Valentina, Marco's cousin, a striking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a polished demeanor, now appeared to me as a viper in designer clothing. Her feigned concern for Isabella, Her casual questions about my medical approach were no longer innocuous. They were probing, assessing, gathering information. My observations of Thomas confirmed the cold, hard logic of my fear. I noticed him on one occasion trying to engage Isabella in a discussion about family finances, a topic that clearly distressed her and which she quickly dismissed. He pushed, subtly, then retreated with a sigh of feigned disappointment. He was desperate for something, and Isabella's continued existence, even in her dying state, was an impediment. Marco, too, noticed the shift in my demeanor. My movements were more guarded, my gaze more watchful. He intercepted me in a quiet hallway one afternoon. His eyes narrowed, searching mine. "Emma," he said, his voice low, a possessive edge to it. He rarely used my first name unless the situation was highly charged. "You're on edge, more so than usual. Has something happened?" My heart leaped. He saw through my carefully constructed walls. The acuity of his perception, his unwavering focus on me, was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. He was a dangerous man, but he was my dangerous man in this strange, convoluted reality. "The internal investigation." "Mr. Santoro," I replied, forcing a professional tone, though my voice was a fraction too tight. "The realization that a member of your household, perhaps even your family, is capable of such depravity. It's unsettling. It changes things." It wasn't a lie, merely a carefully constructed half-truth, a distraction from the true depth of my discovery. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes intense, as if trying to discern the exact contours of my fear. "I understand," he finally said, his voice softening, a rare display of empathy. "This is not your world, Emma, but you're in it now, and I will protect you, just as I will find the one who did this to my mother." The possessiveness was back, fierce and unwavering. "Have you noticed anything specific? Any new suspect, any unusual behavior?" I hesitated, the ledger's secrets burning on my tongue. Could I trust him with this? With the truth about his own uncle and cousin? The man had vanished from my life after his father's murder, an event deeply tied to the criminal underworld. Could I trust him to handle this internal family betrayal with the cold, clear logic necessary to protect me? Or would loyalty to his blood override his nascent trust in me? "I've been observing everyone," I finally said, choosing my words carefully. "Noticing dynamics, but I have nothing concrete yet. Only intuition, a feeling of deeper currents at play." It was a calculated risk, a way to hint at a larger conspiracy without fully revealing the information from the ledger, which could expose my own transgression. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Intuition is a powerful thing, Doctor. Sometimes it sees what logic cannot." He was giving me permission, in a way, to continue my silent investigation. "Be careful, Emma. This viper's nest runs deeper than we know." That very afternoon, the external threat became terrifyingly concrete, directed not at Isabella, but at Marco himself. I was in Isabella's room adjusting her pillow when a sudden, violent explosion rocked the mansion. The sound was deafening, a concussive blast that sent a tremor through the very foundations of the house. Isabella cried out, her eyes wide with terror. I immediately shielded her, pulling her close, my heart slamming against my ribs. Guards rushed into the room, their faces grim, weapons drawn. "Marco's office!" one of them shouted, his voice hoarse with alarm. "Bomb, the east wall is blown out." Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. Marco. His office. He had been there just an hour ago, meeting with his legal team. My mind immediately flashed to the conversation I'd overheard in the basement. The men discussing Marco's edge, Tomas's panic. This wasn't a random attack. It was a calculated strike, designed to rattle him, to eliminate him, or at the very least, to send a terrifying message. I left Isabella in the care of a trusted nurse and, ignoring the shouts of the guards, ran toward the east wing. The air grew thick with the acrid scent of smoke and pulverized plaster. Debris littered the grand hallway. Marco's study, once a fortress of dark wood and leather, was now a gaping wound in the side of the mansion, the east wall reduced to rubble exposing the sky. He was there, amidst the chaos, his face streaked with soot, his bodyguards circling him like wolves. He seemed unharmed, but his expression was pure, unadulterated fury. His eyes, when they met mine, were a blazing inferno of rage and something else, a primal, raw fear that had been buried deep. Marco, I gasped, rushing towards him, heedless of the danger. He saw me, and a flicker of something akin to relief, quickly masked, crossed his face. He grabbed my arm, his grip possessive, pulling me close, shielding me from the swirling dust and the shards of glass. "What were you thinking, Emma? Get back to my mother's room. It's not safe here." His voice was a raw growl, but beneath the anger, I heard the tremor of genuine concern. "Are you hurt?" I demanded, my hands flying to his chest, checking for injuries, my medical instincts overriding my fear. My fingers grazed the rough fabric of his suit, feeling the solid muscle beneath. He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the wreckage of his office. "Minor cuts. Nothing serious, but this is a declaration. They're making a move. They want me out of the picture." The revelation from the basement security room solidified in my mind. Thomas and Valentina weren't just plotting Isabella's death. They were actively moving against Marco. The financial embezzlement, the need to eliminate Isabella before an audit, was clearly tied to a larger power struggle within the Santoro organization. And Marco was the biggest obstacle. "Marco," I said, my voice urgent, barely above a whisper. "I overheard something. In the basement, I think this is about more than just your mother's inheritance. I think it's about control, about money you're missing, and I think Thomas and Valentina are involved. They're planning to frame me for your mother's death, to remove the only person who can connect them to the poisoning before they take over everything." He froze, his head snapping towards me, his eyes wide with shock, then burning with a terrifying realization. The raw accusation, the audacity of my words, would typically be met with fury. But the terror of the recent explosion, the betrayal I spoke of, overrode everything. He saw the genuine fear in my eyes, the unwavering conviction. "What did you say?" His voice was a low, dangerous growl, barely audible above the emergency sirens now approaching the mansion. I quickly recounted the overheard conversation, the details of Thomas and Valentina's plot, the intent to plant evidence in my medical bag. I omitted for now the ledger. I needed him to trust me fully before I revealed the extent of my own trespass. His face hardened, transforming into a mask of pure, lethal intent. His family, his own blood. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined for him. He had been looking outwards for an external enemy. I had pointed him inwards. "They planted a bomb," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, but his eyes were a cold inferno. "They want me dead, and they want to frame you. They underestimated you, Emma, and they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." His hand gripped mine, a fierce, possessive hold. "We worked together. You and I, your medical knowledge, your intuition, my resources, my men. We expose them. We destroy them." It was a reluctant alliance, forged in fire and betrayal, but it was an alliance nonetheless. And it was a crack in his formidable facade. A raw, vulnerable admission of his need for me, his trust in me. We spent the rest of the night in a flurry of activity. While his men secured the perimeter, sealed off the damaged wing, and searched for clues related to the bomb, Marco and I pored over internal financial records. My earlier glimpse of the ledger gave me an unexpected advantage. I guided him towards specific accounts, transactions that seemed out of place, subtly directing his search without revealing how I knew. "This one." I pointed to a series of large, undocumented transfers from a shell corporation listed under an obscure offshore entity. "These dates, they coincide with the incident you mentioned, Isabella's initial decline. And this account, it seems to be linked to Thomas's personal holdings." He looked at me, a flash of surprise, then grudging admiration in his eyes. My competence, my ability to navigate financial documents as deftly as medical charts, was clearly unexpected. "How did you know to look there?" he asked, his voice sharp, suspicious. "Intuition," I replied, a small knowing smile playing on my lips. "And a doctor's eye for anomalies. Patterns don't lie, Marco, whether it's in a blood test or a bank statement." The half-truth held enough truth to satisfy him. For now, he seemed to accept it, his focus consumed by the treachery he was uncovering. The hours blurred into a frantic search for evidence, for truth. His men brought him more security footage, more phone records. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. forming a horrifying picture of calculated betrayal. Thomas, embezzling funds, slowly poisoning Isabella to eliminate her as a witness, and now actively trying to kill Marco to seize full control of the organization. Valentina, his accomplice, the polished viper. Just as the first hint of dawn painted the sky, a chilling discovery was made. One of Marco's men, a quiet, older capo named Vincenzo, who had served the Santoro family for decades, approached Marco with a grim expression. "Boss," Vincenzo said, his voice heavy with regret. "We found something, while clearing the debris from the office, near the safe. A small encrypted data chip. It was wired into the bomb's trigger mechanism, a dead man's switch, and it had this." He handed Marco a small, laminated card. Marco took it, his face paling as he read it. He handed it to me, his eyes bleak. It was a standard high-level security badge, an access card for the Santoro estate. Bearing the photo and name of Dante, my blood froze. Dante, my bodyguard. The silent, imposing figure who had been stationed outside my door for days. The man Marco had personally assigned to protect me. A major thriller twist. The unexpected ally, the trusted protector, was the betrayer. He was the one who had planted the bomb. And if he had betrayed Marco, he had betrayed me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Dante, the one who had watched me, who knew my routines, who guarded my door, was working with Thomas and Valentina. He was their inside man, and if he was their inside man, he knew my vulnerabilities. He knew how to get to me. He was the most intimate threat of all. Before I could even process the full implications of this betrayal, before I could articulate the fresh wave of terror that washed over me, the lights in the study flickered, then died. The mansion plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the monitors and the pale pre-dawn light. An alarm blared, a piercing, insistent shriek that signaled a full security breach. Then, a sudden sharp crack echoed from the hallway, followed by a sickening thud. The sound of splintering wood. The door to my temporary study suite, where my medical bag lay, had just been forced open. My heart leaped into my throat. They weren't just after Marco. They were after me. And they were coming for my medical bag, for the evidence they planned to plant. The direct, violent move against me had begun. I was in immediate, mortal danger. The blare of the security alarm ripped through the mansion, a cacophony of shrieks and flashing red lights that turned the opulent interior into a terrifying inferno. The splintering crash from the hallway, the forced entry into my temporary study suite, echoed like a death knell. They were here, for me, for my medical bag, Emma. Marco's voice, raw with alarm, cut through the din. He surged forward, grabbing my arm, pulling me behind him, his body a formidable shield. His eyes, in the flashing emergency lights, were pure, unadulterated fury. "Vincenzo! Secure the perimeter. Find Dante! Eliminate anyone not authorized." His men, a blur of motion, fanned out, their weapons glinting. The sounds of breaking glass and muffled gunfire erupted from the hallways, drawing closer. The realization hit me with sickening force. Dante wasn't just a betrayer. He was an active combatant leading the assault. "My bag, Marco," I cried, my voice strained. "They're going for my medical bag in the study. They'll plant the evidence there." He nodded grimly, his jaw clenched. "I know." He gripped my hand tighter, his fingers intertwining with mine. A silent promise of protection. "We're not letting that happen." He didn't hesitate. Instead of retreating, he moved with deadly purpose, pulling me with him towards the danger. We navigated the chaos of the damaged study, stepping over rubble, the air thick with plaster dust and the metallic tang of fear. The emergency lights cast dancing shadows, turning familiar objects into grotesque shapes. We reached the doorway to my suite. The heavy oak door hung askew, splintered at the lock. Inside, a shadowy figure was hunched over my medical bag, its contents spilled across the desk. It was Dante. His hands were already fumbling with a small vial-shaped object. "Dante!" Marco's voice cracked like a whip. Dante whirled, his face contorted into a mask of pure malice. He dropped the vial into my open bag, then lunged, a flash of steel in his hand. My eyes widened in horror. He was coming for me. Marco, however, was faster. He released my hand, pushing me behind him with a fierce shove, then met Dante's charge head-on. The clash of bodies was brutal, a symphony of grunts and blows. Marco, fueled by betrayal and a primal need to protect, was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He disarmed Dante with a swift, brutal twist, the knife clattering to the floor. Then, with a series of precise, bone-jarring strikes, he incapacitated his former bodyguard, a grim testament to the lethal power he usually kept hidden. Dante slumped to the floor, unconscious. Marco didn't waste a second. He turned, his gaze scanning the contents of my medical bag. He found the vial, a small dark bottle. He uncorked it, sniffed it, his face tightening. Arsenic, concentrated. He handed it to me. This is what they intended to plant. But it's empty, Marco. I gasped, my eyes widening as I looked inside the small bottle. There's only residue. He frowned, then a chilling realization dawned in his eyes. They've already used most of it. On my mother. They only left enough to frame you. The cold, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. More gunfire erupted. Closer now. The sounds of a struggle intensified in the main hallway. We need to move, Marco ordered, his gaze sweeping over the room, assessing escape routes. They know we're onto them. Thomas and Valentina won't give up easily. Suddenly, a voice, dripping with venom, echoed from the shattered opening where Marco's office wall once stood. Marco, you fool. You should have died with your father. Now you'll die with your witch of a mother. Tomas Santoro, his usually placid face contorted with rage, stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn light, a pistol in his hand. Behind him, Valentina, her elegant features twisted by fear and malice, held a small black device, its red light blinking ominously. Tomas, you bastard! Marco roared, drawing his own weapon. You're too late, Marco, Valentina shrieked, pressing a button on the device. A high-pitched, piercing tone filled the air, agonizingly loud. The entire system is locked down. No escape, no reinforcements. And your mother's oxygen supply. It's been compromised. She has less than an hour. My blood ran cold. Isabella, her oxygen. This wasn't just about eliminating Marco. It was about ensuring Isabella died on their terms, before Marco could expose them. It was a desperate final move. Emma, Marco shouted, his eyes blazing. My mother! Can you save her? My mind raced. Oxygen tanks, medical equipment, power systems, my medical bag, now empty of the poison but still containing crucial diagnostic and life-saving tools. My skills. This was my fight now, too. Her room is secured. But if the main oxygen supply is compromised, I grabbed my medical bag, the one they had tried to desecrate. I need to get to her now. I might be able to manually override the system, or at least provide supplemental oxygen from her emergency tanks, but I need to do it quickly. Follow me, Marco commanded, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. He moved with a speed and agility that defied his formal attire, leading me through the labyrinthine mansion. The fight raged around us, his men battling Thomas's hired thugs. We heard Vincenzo's voice bellowing orders, holding the line. We reached Isabella's suite. The door was locked, but the system, as Valentina had boasted, was dead. The backup generator is offline, a guard shouted. No power to the locks! Stand back, Marco roared. With a single, powerful kick, he shattered the doorframe, forcing the heavy oak open. Inside, Isabella was struggling, her breath shallow, rasping. The nurse, loyal to Isabella, was frantically trying to get oxygen to her, but the medical machinery was failing. Her vitals are dropping, I cried, rushing to her side. Her sats are dangerously low. I knew what I had to do. I needed to manually pump oxygen to bypass the compromised system. It was a desperate measure, but it was all I had. Marco was at my side, his hand firm on my shoulder. What do you need? Oxygen, from the emergency tanks. And power! Any power source for the regulator. I was already assessing the equipment, my mind a whirl of medical calculations, disconnecting lines, searching for the manual valve. Just as I began, a new voice laced with chilling triumph cut through the air. Looking for this, doctor? Valentina. She stood in the shattered doorway, Thomas behind her, a twisted smile on her lips. In her hand, she held Isabella's small personal oxygen regulator, the very device I needed to manually pump oxygen. She dangled it mockingly. Without this, she's dead within minutes. And without her, Thomas inherits everything. And you, dear doctor, will be framed for murder. My heart plummeted. She had thought of everything. The regulator, a small, inconspicuous device, was the key to saving Isabella. Without it, even with the oxygen tanks, I couldn't deliver the life-sustaining air. Marco surged forward, but Thomas raised his pistol. "One more step, Marco, and she dies. And your mother will follow." This was it, the climax. The life-or-death moment. I looked at Valentina, then at the regulator in her hand. My mind, trained for critical situations, clicked into overdrive. I remembered the ledger, the financial documents, the subtle power Marco had to cut off their financial lifelines. I remembered his earlier confession, his vulnerability. He had chosen me, trusted me. Now, I had to be worthy of that trust. "Valentina," I yelled, my voice ringing with a sudden fierce conviction. "You're making a mistake. Marco knows about the embezzlement. He has the financial records. He's going to cut you off. Thomas promised you a fortune, but he was lying. He was going to cut you out once Isabella was dead and he had control." My words hit their mark. Valentina's eyes, already wide with malice, flickered with doubt, then a dawning horror. Her grip on the regulator loosened infinitesimally. "She's lying, Valentina," Thomas shrieked, his face turning purple with rage. "Don't listen to her. She's trying to divide us." "He has the records, Valentina." I pressing my advantage. "He knows about your offshore accounts. The transfers from 12 years ago, linked to his father's death. He'll destroy you financially before you see a penny." It was a gamble, throwing out a mix of truth and calculated assumption, banking on her greed and her fear. Valentina stared at me, then at Thomas, then back to me, her eyes darting between us. The idea of losing the inheritance, of being double-crossed by her uncle, was a far more potent threat than Marco's gun. Her loyalty to Thomas, always conditional on financial gain, fractured. "The accounts," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The offshore accounts he promised to protect?" Thomas, seeing his plan unraveling, seeing Valentina's betrayal, roared in fury and lunged at her, his pistol momentarily forgotten. "You stupid bitch! I told you to keep your mouth shut!" It was the opening Marco needed. He moved like a shadow, a blur of motion. He tackled Thomas, sending the pistol skittering across the floor. A fierce, brutal fight erupted between them, years of simmering resentment and betrayal boiling over into raw violence. Meanwhile, Valentina, her eyes still on me, her face pale with the dawning realization of her own betrayal, stumbled back. The regulator, forgotten in her hand, dropped. It rolled, sliding across the polished floor. "Marco," I screamed, pointing. "The regulator!" He saw it, even as he grappled with Thomas. A split second. He wrestled free, kicked Thomas hard, then dove for the regulator. He snatched it up, then threw it to me, a perfect, desperate pass. I caught it, my fingers closing around the precious device. "Thank you!" I gasped, already attaching it to the oxygen tank. My medical skills, my years of precision, took over. I worked quickly, my hands flying, adjusting the flow, creating a life-saving manual circuit. Isabella's shallow breaths began to deepen, her color slowly returning. The fight between Marco and Thomas was short and savage. Marco, fueled by the cold fury of betrayal and the desperate need to protect his mother and me, was utterly ruthless. He subdued Thomas, knocking him unconscious with a single decisive blow. By the time Marco's men stormed the room, having fought their way through Dante's thugs, both Thomas and Dante were incapacitated. Valentina, trembling and defeated, was swiftly apprehended. The threat was neutralized. The silence that descended was deafening, broken only by Isabella's now steady, rhythmic breathing. Marco turned to me, his face streaked with sweat and soot, a dark bruise forming on his jaw. He looked like a warrior king, victorious yet scarred. His eyes, however, were not cold. They were filled with a raw, overwhelming emotion. Relief, gratitude, and an intensity that took my breath away. He walked to me, pulling me into his arms, crushing me against his chest. His embrace was fierce, possessive, desperate. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling the scent of smoke, adrenaline, and something uniquely him, something that felt like home. My body, still trembling with the aftershocks of fear and adrenaline, molded against his. "You saved her," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his lips brushing my hair. "You saved both of us. You trusted me, Emma. When I doubted you, when my own family betrayed me, you believed in me. You brought down their whole house of cards." "You believed me," I corrected, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes, my own filled with unshed tears. When all the evidence, all the family loyalty pointed to me as the culprit, you chose to believe me. That's all I needed. His eyes, dark and turbulent, reflected my own raw emotion. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of the deep chasm of distrust we had bridged. The foundation of a new, fierce bond. He leaned down, his lips brushing mine, a feather-light touch that promised something more profound. I never stopped loving you, Emma, he murmured, his breath warm against my mouth. I was a boy who made an impossible choice. I'm a man asking for a second chance, a lifetime. My heart swelled, a dizzying mix of grief for Isabella's impending loss and an overwhelming surge of love for this complicated, dangerous man. You're mine, Marco Santoro, I breathed, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. No more running. Not from them, not from us. He lowered his head, his mouth claiming mine in a kiss that was both gentle and fierce, a communion of souls that had been broken and were now, finally, beginning to mend. It was the kiss of two survivors, of a love that had defied death and 12 years of silence. Intimate scene. Grief, desire, healing. Later that night, the mansion was quiet, the storm subdued. Tomas, Valentina, and Dante had been secured, their plot fully exposed. Isabella was stable, her breathing eased, though her prognosis remained unchanged. She had rallied thanks to our desperate efforts, but the cancer was terminal. My professional duty was done, or at least temporarily alleviated. Marco led me to his private suite, a room of subdued elegance, far removed from the chaos of the day. The only light came from the flickering embers in the grand fireplace, casting dancing shadows that softened the edges of the room. The air was thick with unspoken emotion, with the ghosts of battles fought and wounds reopened. He stood before me, his eyes dark with a longing that mirrored my own. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened, revealing the powerful column of his throat, the pulse hammering beneath his skin. My own dress, stained with soot and grime, felt like a shroud. Emma, he whispered, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently cupped my face. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone, tracing the tear tracks that had long since dried. Are you all right, truly? I nodded, my voice thick. I am now. My gaze locked with his, searching, finding an answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask for years. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with mine. I thought I'd lost you. Twice. The vulnerability in his voice was a revelation, shattering the last vestiges of the cold. Impassive boss, my fingers, drawn by an irresistible force, reached up to touch the faint scar on his cheek, a roadmap of the battles he'd fought in my absence. And I thought I'd never touch you again? He drew back, just enough for his gaze to sweep over my face, then lower, lingering on my lips, my throat, the rise and fall of my chest. His eyes were reverent, worshipful. You're more beautiful than I remembered, Emma. More than I ever dared to hope for. He reached for the zipper of my dress, his fingers hesitant, then firm, slowly, meticulously unfastening it. The fabric slid down my shoulders, pooling around my feet, leaving me in just my delicate lace chemise. The coolness of the air on my skin was quickly replaced by the heat radiating from his gaze. His eyes devoured me, a silent, profound worship. May I? He asked, his voice barely audible, seeking my explicit consent, even now, in this moment of overwhelming desire. Yes, I whispered, my voice thick with longing. Always. His hands, calloused yet gentle, slid around my waist, branding my skin like clay. He pulled me closer, the soft silk of my chemise the only barrier between us. His lips found the hollow of my throat, tracing a path down to my collarbone, each touch sending shivers through me. I arched into him, my hands finding purchase on his broad shoulders, my fingers tangling in his dark, thick hair. The sensual tension was exquisite, a slow, agonizing build. He eased the chemise from my body, letting it fall to the floor, leaving me bare before him. His eyes, dark and intense, traced the curve of my hip, the slight scar on my abdomen from an appendectomy years ago. Every part of you is mine, he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. A possessive claim that resonated deep within my soul. He found my hands, bringing them to his lips, kissing each fingertip, then pressing them against his chest, over the frantic beat of his heart. Then, with a low groan, he shed his own clothes, each piece falling to the floor with a soft rustle, until he stood before me, magnificent and powerful. His body was a work of art, sculpted by years of dangerous living, a testament to his strength and resilience. I saw the faint white scar across his ribs, a relic of a past I didn't know, a reminder of the life he'd led. I reached out, my fingers tracing the scar, a silent offering of healing. He pulled me against him, skin to skin, the contact a jolt of pure electricity. The heat, the raw power of him enveloped me. His hand found the curve of my waist, the other cradling the back of my head, pulling me into a deep, soul-shattering kiss. Our mouths met, hungry, desperate, a release of years of pent-up emotion. We came together on the soft rug before the fireplace, the warmth of the embers a soft counterpoint to the fire igniting between us. He moved over me, his gaze locked with mine, asking for, giving, everything. Our bodies moved in a slow, ancient rhythm, a dance of grief and healing, of passion and profound connection. Each thrust was a promise, each gasp a confession. Tears streamed down my face, tears of sorrow for Isabella, tears of relief for our survival, tears of an overwhelming, intoxicating love. "I love you, Marco Santoro," I choked out, the words raw and true, echoing the silent, desperate plea of my 16-year-old heart. His eyes, dark and luminous, met mine. "And I love you, Emma Romano. Always been mine, never letting go, never again." His voice was thick with emotion, his body trembling with the force of his climax. The moment broke, a wave of sensation washing over us both. We held each other close, wrapped in the afterglow, our breathing heavy, our skin slick with sweat. He pressed kisses to my hair, my forehead, my temple. "My mother knew," he whispered, his voice rough. "She knew about us. That summer. She told me not to let you go again, Figlio. And I won't. Never again." The following morning, after the chaos had subsided and the house was once again secure, Isabella's time came. I had managed to stabilize her, to give her 4 more precious, conscious days, days she spent holding our hands, her eyes, though clouded by illness, clear with an old wisdom. "I always knew about you two," she whispered, her voice reedy, barely audible, on her last day. Her gaze drifted from my face to Marco's, a knowing smile gracing her lips. "That summer, I saw how he looked at you. Don't let her go again, Figlio." She squeezed our hands, a final blessing. She died peacefully, held between the 2 people she loved most. Marco crumbled then. He hadn't cried since his father died, but as Isabella's last breath left her, he broke. He buried his face in my shoulder, his powerful body shaking with gut-wrenching sobs, his grief raw and uninhibited. I held him, stroking his hair, offering him the comfort and strength he had offered me. In the days that followed, after Isabella's funeral, after the arrests of Tomas, Valentina, and Dante, after the storm had passed, the mansion felt different. Lighter, a place where new beginnings could bloom from old ashes. Marco stood before me in the study, the same room where I had discovered the ledger, where we had fought side by side. The remnants of chaos had been cleared, but the scars remained, a testament to what we had endured. "I never stopped loving you, Emma," he said, his gaze unwavering, his voice filled with a profound sincerity. "I was a boy who made an impossible choice. I'm a man asking for a second chance, a chance to build a life with you, a real life. My world will always be complicated, Emma, but it will be mine, and I will protect it, protect us, with everything I have. But you have a choice, a safe life away from this, or a life with me. It's yours to make." I looked at him, at the man he had become, dangerous, formidable, but also vulnerable, fiercely loyal, deeply loving. He had chosen me, trusted me when all evidence pointed otherwise. He had shown me his heart, his fears, his strength. You believed me when evidence said I was guilty, Marco, I replied, my voice strong, certain. That's all I needed. That's all I'll ever need. I walked to him, reaching for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. You're mine, Marco Santoro. No more running. I choose you. I choose us. Epilogue to 6 months later. 6 months later, the scars of the past were still present, but they were fading, replaced by the vibrant growth of a new future. I was still Dr. Emma Romano, practicing oncology, but my life had expanded beyond the sterile walls of my clinic. I now ran the Isabella Santoro Family Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to cancer research and patient care, a legacy of healing in Isabella's name. The foundation was already making a significant impact, a beacon of hope where there had once been only despair. Marco had quietly, meticulously reformed his family's businesses, steering them away from the shadows, towards more legitimate enterprises. The ruthless intelligence he possessed was now channeled into building a respectable, powerful empire, one that honored his mother's memory. The dark undercurrents were still there, perhaps, but they were receding, replaced by a commitment to a different path. One crisp autumn afternoon, we visited Isabella's grave. She was buried next to Marco's father, under a towering oak in a secluded corner of the family mausoleum. The marble was smooth, cool beneath my fingertips. I placed a bouquet of fresh lilies, her favorite, on the stone. Marco stood beside me, his arm wrapped around my waist, his presence a comforting anchor. He squeezed my hand, his gaze thoughtful as he looked at the names carved into the stone. She was right, he murmured, his voice soft, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I won't let you go again. We walked away hand in hand, the setting sun casting long shadows behind us. Our life was a testament to second chances, to trust forged in the fires of betrayal, to a love that had not only survived 12 years of absence and unimaginable danger, but had grown stronger, deeper, fiercely protective. We were building our future, brick by painful brick, on the foundation of an earned love, a love that chose each other forever.